In Chapter 15, we look at substance abuse, addiction, and dependency. Drug use and abuse. What actually qualifies abuse? Usually, when there's abuse, there's two criteria that are met. The use of the drug puts someone at a significant increased risk for negative consequences. Also, taking the drug interferes in some way with their normal daily responsibilities and accomplishments. There are two types of abuse: physical addiction and psychological dependency. With physical dependency, this occurs when our body is physically dependent on the drug. If we suddenly take that drug away, we experience withdrawal, and these symptoms include things like nausea, pain, and seizures. Psychological dependency is a little different in that it doesn't necessarily produce physical dependency symptoms, but we do have an overpowering psychological need for the drug, resulting in a compulsion to take it. What are the motivations for drug use? Usually, adolescents are using drugs for one of these reasons. Either they're experimenting simply out of curiosity, this is short term, they just want to see what it's like. Social recreational is when they are doing it with certain friends or peers in certain settings. Circumstantial situational is where they are actually taking the drug for an anticipated effect. They're using a depressant to calm them down, or they're using a stimulant to pep them up. They know the reason for using that particular drug. Intensified drug use is long-term use of a drug, at least once daily, to achieve relief from some type of persistent problem or stressful situation. Compulsive use is when the drug occurs in high frequency, high dosage for a relatively long duration. This produces physiological addiction and or psychological addiction, with disuse resulting in physiological discomfort and psychological stress. There are four main types of drugs: narcotics, stimulants, depressants, and hallucinogens. Narcotics, which is what we would typically call our class of painkillers, work by mimicking our endorphins, which are our body's natural chemicals for relieving pain. Examples of narcotics are opium, morphine, codeine, heroin. They are highly addictive because of their ability to mimic our own endorphins. Once we stop taking the narcotic, our body will stop producing its endorphins the way that it normally would. Morphine and heroin users typically suffer severe consequences. Habitual use will lead to loss of white matter in the brain, leading to physiological changes, loss of appetite, malnutrition, loss of self-care, self-neglect. Addiction is severe, meaning their lives are centered around finding the next fix. Stimulants are used to rev up our central nervous system, usually to give us energy. Examples of stimulants are cocaine, amphetamines, prescription stimulants such as Ritalin and Adderall, and ecstasy. Depressants serve to slow down the central nervous system, to calm us, to relax us. When taken in too large of quantities, they actually can slow down the heartbeat and breathing to very dangerous levels. Examples of depressants are barbiturates, tranquilizers, inhalants, and alcohol. Hallucinogens are a class of drugs that actually alter our perception and state of consciousness. Examples of hallucinogens are marijuana, LSD, mushrooms, all those different types of hallucinogenic drugs. Marijuana is the most widely used illegal drug in America. Part of its popularity comes from the fact that it is a very hardy crop that can be grown almost anywhere. We do know that marijuana impairs the function of the hippocampus, which is our memory area of the brain. The principal acting ingredient in cannabis is THC. A new drug, Salvia, is something that people are finding that's also a hallucinogen. It is a part of the mint family and may be either chewed, smoked, or made into a tea. Instead of affecting serotonin, it actually activates a specific type of opiate receptor. So the big picture of adolescent drug use, the most frequently used drugs by adolescents, of course, are alcohol, tobacco, and marijuana. Alcohol and cigarette use has declined. Illicit drug use has stayed steady, and marijuana use has actually increased. What patterns appear when we compare drug use by high school versus college students? University and high school seniors are essentially equally likely to use any illicit drugs. University students are only very slightly more likely to use marijuana, and university students are more likely to use ecstasy and to drink alcohol and to be heavy drinkers as compared to high school students. Reasons for drug use. Many adolescents are just simply curious and want to see what it's like to use drugs. Oftentimes there is social pressure to try drugs, especially when you're with your friends. Some teenagers are just bored and looking for something fun to do. And then other times they are actually self-medicating, trying to manage their emotions and negative feelings. Who is at risk for compulsive drug use? Adolescents with family discord obviously are at a risk, especially if there is an unstable or non-supportive home life. Teenagers who may have natural tendencies towards being impulsive or sensation seekers. Also teenagers who experience puberty early. And also genetics may play a role in being vulnerable to becoming addicted to drugs. Tobacco use has changed over time. Actually, we're seeing a decline in tobacco use, probably due to some of the major public health efforts in showing the downsides of smoking tobacco. Teens who start smoking as a teenager are at a much more likely risk of being an adult smoker who is addicted. Many people believe that tobacco is a gateway drug to other more serious drugs, and of course tobacco is a major cause of cancer, leading to millions of preventable deaths. Why do adolescents continue smoking once they start? For many of them, it becomes a coping strategy for stress and anxiety. It becomes part of their routine. They associate using tobacco with social events. Of course, nicotine is physically addictive. There is smokeless tobacco, chewing tobacco, and snuff. And of course, using the chewing tobacco and snuff puts you at risk for mouth and throat cancer. And then e-cigarettes are growing in popularity. And even though they're seen as being safer than cigarettes, they still have health risk and they still can cause cancer. Alcohol and excessive drinking. 27% of 8th graders and 66% of high school seniors have had alcohol at some point in their lives. 9 and 37% of these same groups have consumed alcohol within the past month. Teenagers are moving away from the wine coolers and moving more towards the hard liquor wine and beer. Binge drinking is a big issue for adolescents, very dangerous. Binge drinking is defined as 5 drinks in a 2-hour period, a quantity at which various risks become very high. Drunk driving is a huge factor in binge drinking. It's also implicated in homicides. Nearly 40% of people younger than 21 who are victims of fatal drownings, burns, and falls were tested positive for alcohol. Sexual and physical assault are more common when you are drunk. Adult and peer influences. Drinking by adolescents reflects their perceptions, their attitudes and behaviors of adults in American society. And so, of course, their drinking behavior is influenced by their parents' behaviors. Parental authoritarianism is linked to greater drinking. Parents who are moderate and heavy drinkers have teens who are more likely to become heavy drinkers. Parents who do more monitoring of their teens have teenagers who are less likely to drink. Of course, peers influence alcohol use. Group customs may lead to peer pressure. Many youths drink because they think it is the normal behavior of everyone, and so they don't want to be someone who stands out from the norm. Physical consequences of alcohol use, of course, it does lead to cirrhosis of the liver in large amounts. It also leads to an impaired immune functioning. It also can change brain development because we know that adolescent brains are still developing, especially in the area of the frontal lobe, which is associated with planning and impulse control. Drinking tends to decline between adolescence and adulthood. Some of the reasons for this is increased responsibilities that come along with adult life, and less time is spent socializing after we get out of school, and so these could be reasons for less alcohol usage.